So in this video I'm going to read some of the chapters of this novel that I wrote several years ago. I tried to get it published, but all of the agents rejected it. There were a few that were kind of interested in it, but they wanted me to make certain changes. I'm not going to go into what those changes were, but basically I was against those changes because I thought it would have basically made a whole different story than what I wanted. Anyway, here is the first chapter of the story I read. It's called Twilight Chronicles Dawn. It's intended to be the first of a three-part series. Twilight, by the way, I wrote this before the vampire novel came out. I'm probably going to end up changing the title to Pandemonia Chronicles, but it is what it is. So here we go. Chapter 1, Help. There he is, thought Gestalt Chernobog, Mr. Absolute Terror himself. The androgynous figure of Count Varney stood before him with a piercing gaze, but it's hard to be intimidating while creeping around in a long-sleeved, puffy white buccaneer shirt with lacy trimming. If there were a proper dress code for vampire lords, Count Varney was definitely trying a little too hard to look the part. Too much Austin Powers, not enough Dracula. At any result, it was time for him to die, again, or whatever it is the undead do when they fade to ash. Gestalt! Turn off that game and let's go! Gestalt's concentration was broken. He sat on his beanbag, staring at the pixels of his TV screen. The August issue of Leap Gamer magazine lay on his lap, opened and turned to the walkthrough guide for Forever Fantastic 07. Bah, he thought. I can't save in the middle of a battle. Gestalt! His mother shouted again. Maybe if I pretend I didn't hear her. Gestalt! Alright, I'm coming. Gestalt turned off the television set but left the game console running. There was no way he was going to lose all the progress he had made. Did you put on that tunic yet? Gestalt looked to his bed and saw the brown burlap potato sack with 3 large holes cut into it. No, Mom, replied Gestalt. I'm not wearing that thing. Oh, yes you are. Oh, no, I'm not. It'll give me a rash. Gestalt heard the tip-tap of his mother's shoes in the wooden hallway outside his room, and within seconds she stood in his doorway, dressed in the pewter white shirt and black satin apron that comprised of her pseudo-15th century serving wench costume. Her brown hair rolled into Princess Leia buns. Gestalt's mother stared disapprovingly at the black t-shirt Gestalt was wearing, the one that bore the crossbone label of his favorite punk band, the Jolly Rogers, and her face soured when she noticed he was still wearing the baggy black bondage pants he'd been wearing for the past 3 days. Lose the clown pants, at least, said Gestalt's mother. Gestalt fixed his eyes defiantly at his mother. He wasn't backing down. Fine, she said. I don't have time to argue with you. Comb your hair at least, and let's go. Gestalt went to the bathroom and spiked his otherwise handsome black hair with styling gel until his head resembled a porcupine's butt. His mother sighed. All right, let's go. A Renaissance fair is a wonderfully great way for getting in touch with your family roots, or at least that's what Gestalt's mother often told him. However, Gestalt had little interest in attending a silly social gathering for old nerds. He would have rather stayed home and played video games. If only his mother would understand. Gestalt! I just don't get you sometimes. His mother walked near him as they entered the gates of the grand old fair, which on any other day was known as Champouille City Park. You spend hours cooped up in your room pretending to be a knight on the TV, but you have the opportunity to live like one for a weekend. You won't even so much as put on a tunic. What's the difference? Mom, said Gestalt. The difference is when I'm in my room, nobody can see how ridiculous I look. Oh, you look quite ridiculous anyway, my dear, said Gestalt's mother. Why can't you just lighten up? You used to love the fair back when you were a junior squire scout. Though he was too proud to admit it aloud, his mother had a point. Gestalt very much enjoyed the fairs when he was a child. For a few years, he even competed in his share of youth tournaments, wielding his cumbersome wooden sword and stocky shield against the other young knightly pretenders, to see who would win the little plastic trophies that made them the envy of their fellow 3rd and 4th graders. Well, at least for several minutes. The heart of a child is a capricious thing. But that was in the past. Gestalt was now becoming an adult. He just turned 16 this past April. It was time for him to end his involvement in such childish activities, like fencing and horseback riding. After all, what would his friends Jack and Tim think? Actually, Gestalt knew exactly what Jack and Tim would think, because it had been only a week ago that, while helping him sift through his room in a quest for an old game cartridge, Tim somehow discovered some Polaroid pictures that Gestalt's mother saved from an old tournament and showed his find to Jack. Both of them, with devilish smiles, had told the embarrassed Gestalt that they didn't know he had been in the circus and would like to see some clown tricks. Gestalt shuddered when he thought about a picture, which his mother would no doubt want to take, of him wearing the potato sack shirt his mom designed this year. The image had been haunting him all week, which is why he tried his hardest to convince his mother to let him stay home this year. Half the reason he even bought Forever Fantastico 7 last weekend was to have an excuse not to leave his room this weekend. But part of him knew his plan was fundamentally flawed, for his mother considered the annual Renaissance Fair a family ritual at this point, and she could not be deterred from it with any amount of begging. Once they got through the waiting line at the ticket booth, Gestalt and his mother were greeted by a lanky middle-aged man colorfully attired in the bright purple and yellow pinstripe costume of a cartoon court jester. "Good morrow to you, good sir and mistress." The fool waved his right hand in a spiral before his belly, while stooping to take a bow. "And welcome to the grand old fair." Gestalt's mother spread the ends of her dress just over her knees to make an awkward kind of curtsy, as Gestalt always saw to be the proper custom for ladies to do at Renaissance fairs. "Good morrow to you too, sir, noble sir," she said. Gestalt tried to keep his distance and ignore the man. Lameness is a contagious disease that infects all who come near it. It's best to just keep walking, thought Gestalt. Embarrassed, Gestalt's mother looked angrily at him. "Gestalt! Don't be rude! Greet him properly!" Without looking directly at the jester, Gestalt waved his left hand in the general direction of the man, as if to say howdy. "Gestalt, play along and use the proper greeting! You know better than to break character." "But I haven't broken character. I'm pretending that I'm a time traveler from the future where people are actually cool." As had become routine in the situation, and the many others like it, his mother let loose a deep and heavy sigh, then shook her head disappointedly as if to imply that she didn't know what to do with her own son. "If you're going to be like this, then you can wait in the car until I'm ready to leave." The family car. That was a place Gestalt, having not been the most well-behaved child inside a supermarket, was well acquainted with. On a hot summer day like this, sitting in his mother's compact car for a few hours was comparable to being locked inside a big oven. Gestalt would practically be cooked alive. He could even foresee the vinyl car seat melting itself around his back to trap him in a hot and sticky prison. Besides, if he went back to the car, he'd just get bored and have nothing to do. Gestalt dug his hands into his baggy pant pockets, shrugged his shoulders, and proposed an alternate plan to his mother. I'll just wander around the bazaar for a bit instead." Gestalt glanced at his mother from the corner of his eye. Not making direct eye contact seemed to be key for avoiding banishment. "Well, just don't get into any trouble," replied his mother, half listening, for she was now preoccupied with the dangling bells of the jester's fashionable hat. "Oh, and they will have the jousting around noon, you know. You'll at least enjoy that, I'm sure." "Perhaps," thought Gestalt. "Or perhaps I'll do something else." Next page. Gestalt drifted through the wonderland of medieval revival absurdity to find what he was searching for, the food court. It was a very good thing that someone believed root beer and hot dogs existed in the 17th century, otherwise he might have had to walk across the street to the local burger hut restaurant to get a decent lunch, and that would have been a bother. Looking around the court, Gestalt saw that the usual motley crew of fair actors had shown up this year. Every possible archetype Gestalt could think of was present. Amateur shoemakers, fake blacksmiths, and fairy wand wood carvers peddled their wares from booths that lay underneath a sky of blue tarp canopies. This was a very good thing, as Gestalt was certain many of the booth owners had rarely left their parents' basements all year, and imagined they would be quite susceptible to sunburns, especially the ones running around half naked with fake fairy wings strapped to their backs. Of course, a Renaissance fair just couldn't be complete unless a few bearded, portly men attired in forest-green sweatpants and tennis sneakers showed up. As Gestalt expected, every one of these men he came across had thrust through their belts a sword-like object manufactured in Taiwan from $4 worth of stainless steel and wood. Gestalt knew that, to inexperienced Renaissance fair attendees, they might look like jesters at a glance, but he knew that the poor sap who believed that would have been vastly wrong. In reality, these were men who were only attending the fair to see teenage girls in skimpy gypsy costumes. The actual, slightly more professional fools were too busy struggling to force themselves in an old English accent of these and thous, while performing feats of juggling, card tricking, ballad singing, and money begging. When your job is to make young children smile with delight so they will drop their parents' quarters into your hat, Gestalt thought you probably don't want to be seen brandishing sharp pointy things in your hands. It's the spirit of the thing that counts the most, I guess, thought Gestalt, still enjoying his hot dog at a picnic table near the food court. Now that he had something in his stomach, he was feeling a little better about his plight. At least everyone seems to be having a good time, even if they do look a little lame. Speaking of lame, Gestalt's train of thought was interrupted by a nearby shout. "Through dangers untold and hardships unnumbered," cried out a pimple-faced high school boy with an obvious flair for the overdramatic role-playing, "I have fought my way here to the castle beyond the Goblin City!" Goblin City, in this case, seemed to be the park playground that was infested with a disturbingly large number of runny-nosed toddlers, armed with brittle plastic swords and wooden sticks that were swiftly wielded against anything that moved, including themselves, and even a few things that didn't move. Gestalt did have to admit, from a certain point of view, toddlers could be goblins. Another fine example of role-playing dribble was the booming voice of a merchant that managed to penetrate the other mindless chatter of the crowd and catch Gestalt's attention. "Hear ye, hear ye! Come hither to Sir Metatron Boogly's ye old shop of wondrous trinkets and things. We have everything thou needs, unless that ye don't." So unusual was this phrase that it beckoned Gestalt's curiosity enough to risk lameness contamination by re-entering the crowd. It would probably be a waste of time, but when he heard a declaration that ridiculous, he just had to take a look at what kind of mail-order junk Sir Metatron was trying to pass off as trinkets. Displayed on Sir Metatron's table were fine examples of items you typically found for sale at a Renaissance fair, including plastic daggers, fox gold bracelets, rock-studded rings, and plastic water guns. There were also a few additional items that weren't commonly found at a bazaar booth, all of which were expensive-looking jewelry, mostly rings, bracelets, and earrings. Gestalt thought some of these pieces seemed to be of unusually high quality for a fair booth sale, and the best example was probably a very peculiar round medallion attached to a long black chain. Engraved into the silver medallion with a gold stamp was what could only be the engraving of an eye, the kind of symbol Gestalt recognized from the back of a $1 bill. "I've never seen a necklace like this before," thought Gestalt, though it was not as if he had ever fancied jewelry before, aside from a studded bracelet, of course. But there was something alluring about this medallion that he couldn't quite figure out, and Gestalt intended to keep looking at it until he could figure out what that something was. A unique specimen, isn't it? A firm and unfamiliar hand rested on Gestalt's right shoulder. Gestalt spun his head around to the side to find a tall man with pale skin and long silver hair that flowed around his neck. Although being touched by a complete stranger was really weird, the way the man was dressed was far more unusual, even for actors at the fairs. One might think he was overdressed for the part. The tall man wore an elegant velvet cloak over his shoulders, and his tight leather pants and jacket were dyed vermilion. His eyes twinkled a hint of crimson in the sunlight, and Gestalt thought that he must have been wearing theatrical contacts or something. Sure," replied Gestalt. "You can search for hundreds of years," said the strange fellow, "and you'll never find something quite like this medallion in the entire world. The person who wears this livery collar will surely be lucky." The vermilion-dressed man's gaze was firmly directed at the necklace, as if its wonder was putting some kind of enchanting spell on him. The merchant, Sir Metatron himself, must have seen that Gestalt was looking at his ware, and as merchants usually are eager to seal a deal, Sir Metatron rushed over to him. "Oh, my good young sir, are you interested in this here medallion?" said Sir Metatron. Well, not really," said Gestalt, "but I think this guy here—" Gestalt turned to the point of the man infatuated with metal, but discovered the stranger had quietly walked away without Gestalt realizing it. After the way the vermilion man had been practically drooling over the necklace, Gestalt thought it was a little odd that he just left like that without a word to the merchant. "What was that, young lad?" Sir Metatron rubbed his sweaty hands together and winked his eyes rapidly at Gestalt. He seemed overly eager to sell the merchandise, but Gestalt suspected the strange behavior was just overacting. How much does it cost?" asked Gestalt, out of curiosity. It was a rather cool-looking medallion, after all, and might go well with his bracelet. "Well, a trinket like this is a rare beauty," said Sir Metatron. So I can't just let it go for free. $15 is my asking price. $15? Maybe it wasn't so special then. Gestalt still thought it looked pretty cool, and though, even if it did probably come from... Gestalt still thought it looked pretty cool, though, even if it did probably come from some factory in Taiwan. I'll buy it then. Gestalt handed the merchant the money, and put the medallion around his neck, and then turned around to walk away from the booth. Suddenly, Gestalt felt dizzy and lost his balance. He tried to shrug it off, feeling stupid, but then he felt like the ground beneath him swayed to the right and to the left. A howling gust of chilling wind blew straight into Gestalt, forcing his eyes shut. Gestalt turned his head down toward his chest to shield his face from the slicing air. The shifting winds stopped almost as suddenly as they came, and Gestalt discovered all the people around him were no longer engaged in whimsical conversations. In total silence, Gestalt opened his eyes and found himself surrounded by crowds of people looking at him in horror, as if he were some kind of ghost or criminal. "Demon!" said a prune-faced old woman with a little girl clinging to her ratty, oil-soaked dress. "A demon is among us," said a strangly-looking fellow in a muddy leather jerkin and green leggings. The man pointed a shaky finger directly at where Gestalt was standing. "He appeared out of nowhere! I saw it! I did!" The faces of the crowd were so disfigured in terror that small children grasped hold of their parents' trembling legs. About 4 adults even sprinted away in absolute terror, shrieking in unintelligible and fearful noises that were as loud as their lungs could possibly make. Gestalt found himself the center of attention, and he could feel the piercing gaze of at least 50 people angrily directed at him. While his eyes had been shut, the happy crowd of actors around Gestalt suddenly became a dangerously mad mob of villagers. "Wait a second," thought Gestalt, remembering where he was. "This is probably some kind of special event for the festival. This is just part of the..." Before he knew it, a sharp pain struck the back of Gestalt's head. A child from within the crowd pelted him from the rear of the small rock. "Ow! What the hell are you doing?" Gestalt covered his throbbing head with his hand. "That hurt!" The crowd responded with shocks and gasps. "It speaks our tongue! It's surely come to kill us all! Look at the way it's dressed! It's a devil if I ever saw one!" "The way I'm dressed?" said Gestalt, believing he had discovered the reason for all this unwanted attention. "Oh, so that's it then. You've decided to single me out because I didn't come in a stupid costume." Now, as if things weren't already strange enough, pushing his way from the rear of the crowd came a husky man, mounted on what Gestalt thought was an unusually large ostrich. An ostrich because, at first glance, it looked like a duck, but Gestalt knew ducks did not get that big, so it must have been some kind of mutant ostrich. The man's steel armor flashed in the sunlight, and he appeared to be one of the actors dressed as an otherwise very convincing knight. The mob of people stepped aside to allow the giant bird to pass, lest they be ridden over and trampled upon by its claws, as one of them almost was, for the knight had given no warning when he decided to steer his mount directly into the crowd. The knight rode his paltry steed until it stood before Gestalt, at which point the knight withdrew a rather large broadsword from his side. "You are a fool to be here, demon," said the steel-clad man in a stern, harsh voice. "For the descendants of Rolf Beowulf, the Paladins of Deus, protect this village!" The knight dramatically raised his cross-hilted sword into the air. "I shall smite you down in the name of the goddess Deus, and the world shall be rid of your evil!" Yes, Gestalt was now sure this had to be some kind of contest at the fair, or something like that. Though the end result of all this drama probably meant he'd end up as the king of the day, Gestalt felt very nervous having so many people looking at him. Succumbing to worry and doubt from the pressure he was feeling, Gestalt raised his hands up and grinned anxiously. "Hey, night guy, I really think your costume is really cool and all, but I'm not really all that interested in playing games right now. Sorry." Gestalt started to walk away from the knight, but before he knew what happened next, the armored man swiftly brought down the flat side of his broadsword across the back of Gestalt's head with a great force. Falling to the ground with a heavy thud, Gestalt lost consciousness and fell into the darkness of slumber's bittersweet embrace. End of chapter 1. So, if you would like to read the rest, I have, I believe, 9 chapters of this on Autonomy, which you can read for free. I'll put the link down here. So, comments appreciated.